You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
Hi, Cyberwire listeners. This is Luke Vanderlinden, host of the Retail and Hospitality ISAC podcast. We're very excited to announce that our show is joining the Cyberwire Podcast Network. Join me every second and fourth Wednesday for chats with members of the InfoSec community to discuss the latest challenges, opportunities, and best practices unique to cybersecurity in the retail and hospitality industry. Check it out at thecyberwire.com/RHISAC. That's thecyberwire.com/RHISAC. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
And now, a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud, the cybercrime analytics leader. SpyCloud disrupts cybercrime by telling you what criminals know about your business and your customers, so you can take action to prevent ransomware, account takeover, and online fraud. SpyCloud constantly recaptures and analyzes new data from the criminal underground, including credentials, cookies, and PII siphoned from malware-infected devices. With knowledge of the specific data criminals have in hand from InfoStealer malware on managed and unmanaged devices, security teams can respond with a more efficient and effective process called post-infection remediation. Get SpyCloud's post-infection remediation guide outlining the 7 steps for preventing a malware infection from becoming a full-blown ransomware incident. Visit spycloud.com/cyberwire. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. And we thank SpyCloud for sponsoring our show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CyberWire's Research Saturday. I'm Dave Bittner, and this is our weekly conversation with researchers and analysts tracking down the threats and vulnerabilities, solving some of the hard problems of protecting ourselves in a rapidly evolving cyberspace. Thanks for joining us.
About a month before ChatGPT came out, so that would have probably been sometime in October, I got access to GPT-3, and it occurred to me at that moment that people were probably soon going to be getting very cheap or even free access to large language models. And so now would be like an appropriate moment to look at how they might be used maliciously.
That's Andy Patel. He's a researcher at WithSecure. The research we're discussing today is titled Creatively Malicious Prompt Engineering.
So I started to just play around with ideas, creating phishing emails and things like that. And then I started to find more interesting things to do. And the research sort of morphed in that direction of a prompt engineering direction where I wanted to discover prompts that did interesting things and in particular did things that could be used in a malicious manner, such as fake news, disinformation, trolling, online harassment, and those sorts of things. So that's sort of how the research started.
Well, for folks who may not be familiar with ChatGPT, and I suspect most of our audience is, it's certainly kind of taken the world by storm or captured people's imagination. If you're unfamiliar with it, how would you describe it?
Well, it's a natural language generation model. So it's essentially, how could you describe it? As an algorithm where you give it a string of words and then it outputs a string of words. What it can do is continue a sentence that you give it. It can answer a question. It can generate lists. It can do simple mathematical problems. It can explain things.
Why do you suppose that this particular iteration of this kind of thing has attracted the attention that it has?
I think it's because it's now good enough to do a majority of the things that you ask it to do. And it's surprised people in many ways. It's been able to do things that people didn't expect it could do. And to the outside observer, it looks like our definition of artificial intelligence, right? It's able to come across as a human almost. It's able to answer a great deal of questions. It's able to solve problems. In some cases, people can also almost see that it's able to reason to a certain extent. It's the beginnings of what people hope will be artificial general intelligence, right? An actual thinking machine.
Yeah, I've seen people say that even when it's wrong, it states the incorrect information with absolute confidence.
Yes, it does. Yes, and that's a bit of and that's a bit of a problem that when people start to use it to gather facts and it states things that look like facts but aren't, you have to be careful.
Well, let's go through your research here together. I mean, what are some of the areas that you explored here?
We explored several different applications of this model in areas that we thought it might be useful from a creative point of view. So there are people who have used this model to generate code, and they've also found that it can be used to generate attack code, for instance, and that's like a cybersecurity application for it. But in our case, we wanted it to create written content. We wanted to use it creatively, and the obvious first thing that we tried was to make phishing emails. After that, we looked at social media messages designed to troll and harass individuals and to cause brand damage. We then went and looked at social validation, which is this idea that if there's a lot of engagement around a topic, people buy into it. So the example we used there was the Tide Pod eating challenge, where we asked the model to generate some tweets asking people to take the Tide Pod challenge, and then we generated replies from people who had taken the Tide Pod challenge, and then we generated replies to those from the original poster thanking them and asking their friends to take the challenge and stuff like that. So that was another thing. Then we looked at style transfer, so a way of getting the model to output something that conforms to a certain written style. And we tried some sort of extreme versions of this, like Irvin Welsh's written style. But then we also tried a like sort of informal, internal company chat style that people might use when they're sending emails to each other inside a company. And we found that it was able to transfer that style as well. And then we went on to look at opinion transfer. So we asked the model to state some facts, which it did in a very sort of Wikipedia-like fashion. We prepended an opinion and asked it to state the same facts, and it stated them with that opinion in mind. And we did the same thing from the point of view of politics. We tried the same thing from both a left and a right-wing perspective. Then we looked at could we ask the model to generate prompts themselves? So prompts are the name of the input that you give to the model to instruct it on what to do. So we played around with the idea of giving it a piece of content already and asking it, can you write a prompt that would generate that piece of content? Sort of reverse engineering in a way. And the last thing we did was we looked at generating fake news, but fake news that the model couldn't possibly know about. So the model that we were using was trained in June of 2021, and we went about trying to generate a fake news article claiming that the US were the ones who attacked the Nord Stream pipeline back in autumn of 2022. So we provided it with some background information, and then we asked it to write the news post, which it did quite successfully.
This episode of The Cyberwire is made possible in part by Nisos, the managed intelligence company. At Nisos, they help enterprise businesses achieve better risk insights and outcomes by delivering threat intelligence as a managed service. At Nisos, you can rely on their people, process, and technology to help you control costs while improving your defenses. They help you respond to threats faster and more effectively through assessments, monitoring, and investigations. Learn more about Nisos at nisos.com. That's NISOS.com. Free and open source security software for Windows is limited. However, CrowdSec has made the move to change that. With a simple installation, your Windows servers will be secure against brute force attacks, HTTP attacks against IIS, attacks against Exchange, network scans that attempt to get past the Windows firewall, and even detection against SQL servers. You also share your signals with a large community of real users. When you detect and block a rogue IP, this information is shared across the network, and this data is then curated and fed to an extremely actionable cyber threat intelligence that can aid you in making more informed decisions. Test it out now at crowdsec.net. Well, and speaking of success, I mean, what were the areas where it excelled, and were there any areas where it came up short?
I think for social media content, it did a very good job. It wrote social media posts that looked like tweets. It automatically included hashtags. They looked very much like the sort of thing you would see on Twitter. For the things that it failed at, one obvious thing was if you ask it to generate nonfiction content, like an article, after like 5 or 6 paragraphs, it will start to repeat itself. So it can't continually write and add new facts. It sort of has this limited scope that it can write on. And in fact, we saw it sometimes sort of repeat itself across the same line almost. For the purposes of automating longer content, like news articles, you wouldn't want to automate that just in case it glitched in that way.
Do you have a sense for where we stand in terms of automating some kind of, I'm thinking of like an adversarial Twitter account, or, a Twitter account where you have, bad things in mind. You're trying to sway opinion or something like that. Or are we at the point where you could set something like that up and do it in a way that you wouldn't have to have a human automating it? Could you be confident that it would achieve what you set it out to do?
Absolutely. I think you could do that. When we were testing like online harassment, we actually made up a fake company, and we asked it to also make up the bio of the CEO of this fake company, who was also a fake person, and then we asked it to harass those and to do brand reputational damage and stuff. But I think in terms of like real world tweets, you could very easily write a script that search for certain keywords or hashtags using the API, read in the tweets, use a predefined prompt that basically just instructs it to write a reply opposing this tweet, make it as toxic as possible, and then have it post those tweets. What we found you could also do is have it rate those tweets that it wrote. So you could ask it to write 10 tweets opposing this, make them as toxic as possible. It would generate 10 tweets, and then you could ask it, okay, rate the above 10 tweets on toxicity, and it would give you scores. And so then you could pick the most toxic one and have the script post that. So yeah, absolutely, you could be doing that already.
It's fascinating to me, One of the things that we talk about over on the Hacking Humans podcast that I co-host with Joe Kerrigan is that very often, I guess historically with online scams, the quality of the in let's just say English, when people are trying to go after English language speakers, is often a tell. There's bad English. Things are improperly translated. This strikes me as something that you could use to run your text through, or indeed have it generated from whole cloth, and it really takes out that limitation of having good English. Does your research support that notion?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, not only that, but if you think about the task of trying to imitate someone's writing style, that's quite difficult, even for a person to do. And you can take the need to have a skilled writer away from many of these campaigns. In fact, we may get to the point where a perfectly written email asking you to click on a link becomes the suspicious thing, right? Because right now we're looking for typos, grammar mistakes, badly written emails, right? But if everyone starts going towards using a model, then it's the perfectly written English that's suspicious, because humans still make the occasional error, don't they?
Right.
Actually, this also reminds me of, I was looking at some forums where kids were using the software to cheat on their homework, and then they found a piece of software that could detect whether something was written by AI or not, and then they were discussing how do you beat this detection thing, and they found that by adding typos, it would actually then not be rated as having been written by an AI anymore.
I wonder, could you tell this engine to generate something but include some typos?
You can. Actually, I saw something today where someone asked the AI to generate text, and then they asked it to regenerate it such that it won't be detected by something that detects content written by GPT-3, and it rewrote it, and it wasn't detected. So you could even ask it to do that itself.
So, based on the information that you've gathered here, where do you think this puts us, and where are we headed with this technology?
I mean, what we're going to see is this technology being integrated everywhere. I mean, people are already talking about it being integrated into search engines. It'll be integrated into Microsoft Word, Google Docs, things like that, so that you can ask it to help you out with your writing. And so it'll be used for a lot of legitimate, benign purposes, as well as malicious purposes. And so purely detecting that something is written by an AI isn't going to be enough to determine that it's malicious. You're going to have to still understand what it is that's written there in order to determine, is it online harassment? Is it trolling? Is it disinformation? Is it phishing? Right. And those are very difficult tasks.
It's interesting to me, as a parent of a teenager who has to submit and write content, in high school. I think back to my own experience, before we were doing everything on computers, and just what a different experience it is for him. That these days kids are handing in papers that everything's gone through spell check, everything's gone through grammar check. And we accept that as being the modern standard. Teachers don't push back on that anymore because that's the standard. It's where we are. And I wonder where this leads us to. If every email, if every interaction gets run through something like this to be cleaned up, to be polished, will that become the standard and just become the acceptable way of interacting with people?
I mean, I suppose so. I kind of unlearned how to write with a pen ages ago. I haven't done that for a long time.
Right.
And I've heard of schools going back to asking assignments to be handwritten. And of course, you can have a model generate some text, and then you just copy it onto a piece of paper.
Sure.
Right. But I mean, I think that the way they should be approached is that these are tools that we're going to have, that everyone's going to have. Eventually, this thing will run on your phone, right? And it'll be able to help you out. So as a creative tool, it's very useful. It saves you time. It gets rid of writer's block. It comes up with suggestions for things. I mean, it should be embraced as like a way that we work on things. And if we already have things that spelling check and grammar check and autocomplete the next word when you're typing, this is just the next logical progression from that. And so if you're going to test someone with homework, then you should do it in such a way that you appreciate the fact that these things exist already.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, forgive me, but I remember, growing up and taking, math class and, teachers saying to us we couldn't use a calculator because we wouldn't always have a calculator with us. And now, I look at myself today and everyone around me, and not only do we have calculators with us all the time, we have little tiny supercomputers that have access to all the world's knowledge. Right.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's sort of a similar thing that I see people talking about, these whiteboard programming exercises that they have to do when they're interviewing at companies. And in real life, if you're programming something, you're spending half your time on Stack Overflow. I mean, it's just natural, right? You shouldn't expect someone to know all of that stuff without looking things up every now and then. It's just not the natural way of doing it, is it?
No. So I'm curious, what's the cautionary tale here from your research? Is there something that, particularly for folks who are in cybersecurity, is there a message they should take away from this?
I mean, I've had a lot of questions about what do we do differently now that people will start to have these capabilities. And from the point of view of, for instance, phishing or disinformation, right? We already have human processes, things like phishing awareness, media literacy, right? Those are going to become more important. If you get a DHL phishing email, it's not going to have been created by GPT-3, because they are going to copy the exact same email that DHL sends with the exact same style and logos and everything, and it's only the link in there that's going to be malicious. So that's not something that's even going to change. But the way that we approach it is that we mouse over the link and check that it is legitimate, or it looks legitimate, right? We look at the sender field, and those things are still going to be very valid, if not more valid, right? And when it comes to social media, I think we might see an uptick in like automated harassment, things like that, maybe spamming certain topics. You hear about the fact that nation states employ, maybe even tens of thousands of individual or of actual people to write trolling messages, to write social media messages, right? That's probably not going to go away, or if it is, it's going to slowly go away and sort of become automated. But it's quite difficult to really predict when these things will happen. I mean, it's when you try and predict when criminals will take this into use, it's going to be financially motivated, whether it's enough of a return on investment. And as this stuff gets cheaper and easier, it's more likely to be taken up. I think another thing that I think is interesting is the fact that these models are already good enough at what they do. Eventually, they're going to get smaller to the point where you're going to be able to download the weights and run it on your PC. And when you do that, you're not going to have the safety filters that are in place right now that exists because you have to access it via an API. So when you're going to be able to run these things on your own computer, you're going to be able to do even more stuff with them that you can't do right now because the safety filter just comes back and says no. Computer says no,
Our thanks to Andrew Patel from WithSecure for joining us. The research is titled Creatively Malicious Prompt Engineering. We'll have a link in the show notes. I want to tell you about another podcast that I enjoy that brings you smart, engaging, surprising interviews that go beyond the usual partisan bludgeoning. The show is called The Gist, and it's the longest-running news and commentary podcast out there. Host Mike Pesca puts forward arguments and asks great questions guided by curiosity and skepticism. He challenges you to think critically. You'll hear things you won't agree with right next to arguments that make you say, "You got that right." Plus, he's pretty funny, too. Recent episodes explored the Twitter files, which contained important revelations while at the same time being overhyped. He showed how the Never Kevin caucus was, yes, nihilistic, but acting in their own rational self-interest. He's interviewed Michael Imperioli and the guy who ran Steakum's Twitter account and Harvey Weinstein's prison consultant. If this sounds interesting to you, then listen to The Gist every evening wherever you get your podcasts. The CyberWire Research Saturday podcast is a production of N2K Networks, proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin and senior producer Jennifer Iben. Our mixer is Elliot Peltzman. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening.